Welcome to Randstad. As a leader in the staffing industry, we strive to find a wide range of interesting and challenging assignments for you. Our goal is to provide you with a work experience that is positive, rewarding, and above all, safe. Randstad is committed to making each of your work assignments as successful and safe as possible. We'll go over some of the most important safety issues in this program, but there are 4 key things that you really must know. The first thing is that no job is so important that it can't be done safely. If a client's work environment is unsafe, we will support your right to safety in the workplace and find you a different work assignment if necessary. The second thing is there should be no hidden dangers in your workplace. You have the right to know exactly what you're working with. The third thing is that Randstad will always strive to make sure you have a safe work environment. But it's up to you to be a safe worker. This means always choosing the safe way to do the task at hand because ultimately, safety is up to you. Last and most important, if you don't know, ask. Your Randstad representative will explain your job responsibilities to you before you're sent out on a work assignment. The workplace you're sent to is our client, and we will tell you who to report to on that job. This will usually be your on-the-job supervisor or someone else in authority. If you think a work situation is unsafe, or if you just have a question about it because you don't know, ask your on-the-job supervisor. And if you still have some concerns or don't understand the answer you receive, contact your Randstad representative. We're here to help, and no question is too small. Depending on the workplace you're sent to, you may be around certain work environments or tasks that are higher risk. As a Randstad employee, you're not allowed to take these risks. For example, do not operate any equipment that you have not been trained on. You should also never work with any machinery that isn't properly guarded. This means never operating equipment where you're able to reach into the actual machinery. And you should always be protected from making accidental contact with exposed moving parts that could hurt you. Do not operate any equipment with a lock or tag that looks like this or this. This is called lockout-tagout and can only be performed by trained maintenance personnel at your assigned location. Never remove a lock or tag, since these are meant to prevent equipment from accidentally starting while someone is servicing or repairing the machine. You should never work on a ladder at heights greater than 3 feet or work 3 feet above ground level without proper railing. Working below the surface more than 3 feet is also not permitted. Work-related driving is generally prohibited as a Randstad employee. If you are ever asked to drive a vehicle as part of your job, please immediately contact your Randstad representative. Never enter into an area that is marked by a sign that says confined space or permit confined space, as there may be hazardous conditions. If you're ever asked to do something different than we described as your original assignment, or if you feel you're being asked to perform a function that you haven't been properly trained in doing, please contact your Randstad representative immediately. Now, let's review the information from this lesson. When do you think you should contact your Randstad representative? Would you contact the rep if your on-the-job supervisor asks you to do a job that is different than your original assignment? If you feel that you haven't been properly trained to do your job safely? What about if you feel unsafe, or if you feel that the job you are doing is unsafe? Or would you contact your Randstad rep in all of these cases? Take a moment to think about these situations. Actually, you should contact your Randstad representative in all these situations. Let's continue. Which of these actions is acceptable when working? Operating equipment that you have not been specifically trained to use? Do you think it's okay to place your hand in a machine's point of operation to remove a finished part? Or can you reach into a machine to clear a jam? Do you think that one of these actions is acceptable? Or would you say that none of the actions are okay? If you suspect that none of these are acceptable actions, you're right. Never operate any equipment that you haven't been trained on, and never place your hand in a machine, no matter what the reason. Now, here's a situation you might encounter. As a Randstad employee, can you work more than 3 feet below the surface? Working below the surface more than 3 feet is not allowed at Randstad. Contact your Randstad representative immediately if you are asked to perform this task. Every work situation requires that you take certain basic safety precautions. To begin with, it's your responsibility to show up properly dressed for the job. Now, this is good, but wearing sandals or shorts won't provide you with proper protection and are generally not allowed in the workplace. Observe the client's requirements for things like jewelry or loose clothing, as these could get caught in a machine and cause serious injuries. Some tasks may require you to wear personal protective equipment, also known as PPE. For example, many workplaces require everyone to wear safety glasses to protect their eyes. Other types of common PPE include gloves to protect your hands from the material or equipment you're working with, earplugs or earmuffs to protect your hearing, safety headgear to protect your head, or shoes with steel toes to protect your feet. But don't worry, your Randstad rep will inform you if protective equipment is required for your job. But before you work with any protective equipment, your on-the-job supervisor will show you how to wear it properly. It's then your responsibility to wear PPE wherever it's required. A big exception is any job that requires respiratory protection. If the job requires a respirator for protection against toxic dust like asbestos or lead, or toxic vapors from solvents, this is a prohibited task and you are not allowed to participate. Contact your Randstad rep immediately. Let's stop and review this lesson's information. When do you think personal protective equipment, such as safety glasses, earplugs, or gloves, should be worn? When it makes you feel safer? At all times when working in an area where PPE is required? Or when you remember to put it on? What answer would you choose? It's vital you know that you must wear personal protective equipment at all times when working in an area where it is required. Do you remember what kind of work Randstad does not allow you to do? Is it any work that requires safety goggles, earmuffs, respiratory protection? Or is it all of these? Take a moment to think about your answer. Remember that Randstad prohibits you from doing any task that requires respiratory protection. Contact your Randstad rep immediately. Anytime you're sent to a new job, you may find yourself using or working around materials that you're unfamiliar with. These shouldn't be mysterious. You have the right to know what you're working with, and if there are any precautions you need to take to protect yourself. It is also important that you know what to do if there's accidental exposure. You also need to know about chemical labels. All chemicals come in a container, and every one of those containers come from the manufacturer with a label that contains important cautionary information. There's the product identifier, which includes the name of the product and the manufacturer or supplier, shipping name, shipping numbers, and part numbers, the emergency phone number. There's the signal word and the hazard statements. You might see a pictogram along with the precautionary statements. If something doesn't have a label, ask your on-the-job supervisor to supply one. Because the pictogram is really important, let's take a closer look at it. A pictogram is a symbol that represents a word or an idea. You see them all the time. When you see a pictogram on a chemical label, it represents the hazard of the product. A chemical can have multiple hazards, so it often has more than one pictogram. Pictograms come from the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, or the GHS. They are health hazard, flammability, oxidizer, irritant, gases under pressure, explosive, corrosive, environmental toxicity, and acute toxicity. Labels and pictograms are your first stop for information on chemical products. But there is more information on the product that won't fit on a label. That's when you need the Safety Data Sheet, or SDS. The SDS gives you complete information about a product, including any safety precautions. It's broken down into 16 sections, with the most important information in the first 8 sections of the sheet. The first 3 sections provide information on the identification and the hazards of the product, as well as the list of ingredients. Section 4 of an SDS covers first aid measures in case you get the chemical in your eyes, inhale it, get it on your skin, or swallow it. This section also includes details on immediate and delayed health effects and tells you when to seek medical help. Section 5, Firefighting Measures, tells you if the product can burn or if it's affected when it's exposed to fire. Here, you'll also see precautions, along with techniques and equipment used to fight a fire from this chemical. Section 6, Accidental Release Measures, identifies what to do if the chemical spills, leaks, or is released. It tells you how to contain and clean up the released chemical and what emergency procedures to follow. Handling and storage information is found in Section 7. Following these protective handling measures minimizes the risk of the chemical spilling or being released. You'll also find recommendations for safely storing the product. Section 8, Exposure Controls and Personal Protection, describes the permissible exposure limits for the product, what engineering controls need to be taken, and what personal protective equipment is required while using the product. The last 8 sections provide additional detailed information on the chemical properties of the product, stability and reactivity, health and environmental information, proper product disposal and transportation, regulatory information, and finally, additional information such as the date that the SDS was created or revised. And remember, if you have trouble reading or understanding a label or SDS, ask your on-the-job supervisor for an explanation. Okay, let's pause and review this important information pertaining to hazard communication. Let's say you're assigned to work with an unlabeled container. What would you do before using it? Would you ask your on-the-job supervisor to supply the chemical's label and the safety data sheet? Would you make sure there's a fire extinguisher nearby? Ask a coworker what's in the container? Or would you look for a similar container that has a label? What would you do? If something doesn't have a label, ask your on-the-job supervisor to supply one. You'll also find information about a chemical by looking at its safety data sheet. Whatever you do, don't rely on a coworker or a similar container to give you accurate information. In this lesson, we learned about pictograms. Do you remember if a chemical's label can have only one pictogram, or can it have more than one? A chemical can have one or more hazards, so it can have one or more pictograms. Do you remember how many sections make up each safety data sheet? Is it 8, 12, 16, or does the number of sections vary per chemical? Keep in mind that the globally harmonized system standardized all SDS to require 16 sections. The most important information is in the first 8 sections of the sheet. Many jobs involved some sort of lifting. Whether lifting is your primary task or you just occasionally have to pick something up, knowing how to do it safely can prevent an injury. Get a good wide stance. Keep your back straight and bend at the knees. Test the weight first. Don't overestimate your ability. If it feels like you can lift it, keep the object close to your body. Keep your head up, elbows in, and lift with your legs in a smooth motion. Don't lift with a jerk. Never twist and lift at the same time. Turn your whole body instead. The same goes for when you're carrying a load. Keep it close to your body and never twist with a weight. Turn your feet. Also keep your work area clear so you don't trip over anything. To help keep you safe, Randstad's weight limit for lifting is 50 pounds. If the weight you're lifting is more than 50 pounds, either try to reduce it, get someone to help, or use a tool to help you like a hand truck or pallet jack. If your assignment requires you to lift more than 50 pounds by yourself, contact your Randstad representative. Let's see what you've learned in this lesson on lifting. Let's say you're asked to lift a box that weighs 75 pounds. What should you do? Should you lift it slightly to test your strength before lifting it completely? Could you use a hand truck, pallet jack, or forklift to lift the load? Should you get someone to help you lift it? Or could the answer be more than one of these suggestions? Did you remember that Randstad's weight limit for lifting is 50 pounds? If something weighs more than that, you can try to reduce the weight, get someone to help, or use a tool to help you, like a hand truck or a pallet jack. Do you know which of these lifting techniques is not safe? Stand with your feet spread out wide. Keep your back straight and bend at the knees. Keep the load close and turn with your feet. Keep your head down and elbows out. See if you can pick out the unsafe technique listed here. Safe lifting techniques include getting a good, wide stance, keeping your back straight, bending at the knees, keeping the load close, your feet out, head up, and elbows in. Ergonomics. The word might sound complicated, but here's what it's all about. Ergonomics means understanding that there are ways to do a job that put the least amount of stress on your body. In other words, making the job fit you rather than you trying to fit the job. How hard your job is has a lot to do with the way you do a task, how you sit or stand, how much force you have to use, and how you deal with repetition can make the difference between feeling good and feeling tired and sore. Whether you're sitting or standing, try to position yourself so you're not bent over or putting strain on your body. If your workstation has adjustments, use them. If you're in the same position for a long time, change your position or stretch in the opposite direction. If you seem to be using a lot of force, see if a tool or different technique can help. Or if you can, switch tasks for a while. Think about what you've just learned. Then think about what you should do if you work in the same position for a long time. Should you change your position frequently? Stretch in the opposite direction as your work position? Stay as still as possible while you work? Or do you think more than one of these suggestions would help? If you thought either of the first two options is helpful, you're right. If you're in the same position for a long time, change your position or stretch in the opposite direction. Many companies use forklifts or other powered industrial trucks. It's important that you stay out of the way when they are operating. That's a backup alarm. Look to see where it's coming from and move out of the way. And never stand underneath a load. Even if you think you know how, never attempt to operate this equipment unless you've been trained and certified by the client where you are presently working and have permission from your Randstad representative. Based on what you've just learned, when can you operate a forklift? Would it be only when you have permission from your Randstad representative? Or only if you've been trained and certified by the client where you are working? Or do you think you can operate a forklift if you've driven one before? Think about this and see if you remember. Never operate a forklift unless you've been trained and certified by the client and have permission from your Randstad representative. Most companies are prepared for an emergency, like a medical problem or a fire. They have an emergency plan involving trained people and should not require your assistance. If there's an incident like a fire at your workplace, what you need to do is very simple. Get out. Don't reach for a fire extinguisher. Don't attempt to put a fire out yourself. Evacuate immediately, and when you're sure you're safe, notify a supervisor or someone in the company so they can call 911 for an emergency response. And don't leave the client location until you have been released by a supervisor. When someone gets injured at work, they need help from someone who is qualified. Unless you have received training in first aid and CPR, you could make their injury worse and put yourself at risk if you try to respond. This is especially true if there are bodily fluids present, like blood. careless contact could transmit serious diseases like HIV and hepatitis. Don't touch someone who is injured, and don't attempt to clean anything up. Report the incident immediately to someone in the company so that they can call 911 for a professional emergency response. Let's review by giving you this scenario. You're working in a warehouse when you suddenly smell smoke and see a fire burning. What do you think you should do? Should you grab the nearest fire extinguisher and put out the fire? Should you move closer to investigate the fire before alerting your on-the-job supervisor or coworkers? Maybe you should alert your coworkers and on-the-job supervisor, get out of the building, and go to your assigned gathering area. Or should you leave the building and go home without telling anyone? Imagine yourself in this situation and the action you'd take. In this situation, you should alert your coworkers and on-the-job supervisor, get out of the building, and go to your assigned gathering area. So what if you're the one who gets injured on the job? Randstad's policy is to get you the best care as soon as possible, but we can't do that if you don't report it. Remember, you can't be fired for being injured or reporting an accident. Even if you don't think it's very important, we encourage you to report an injury right away. Quick attention can keep something like a minor cut from turning into an infection, and reporting accidents gives the client a way to assess the safety of the job. One last thought to leave you with. It's necessary to know where the problem areas are before they can be fixed. So it's important that you report anything that seems unsafe. This could be a near miss, an accident that almost happened, something that is an obvious violation, or just something that doesn't seem as safe as it could be. This is a critical part of taking responsibility for your own safety and could very well prevent an injury to yourself or to someone else. And by now, you know what to do. Inform your on-the-job supervisor or call your Randstad rep. Okay, let's review the last lesson to make sure you know the right steps to report an accident. Think about this situation. During your shift, you got a minor cut on your hand. What would you do? Treat it yourself when you get home? Report it immediately to your on-the-job supervisor and your Randstad representative? Would you report the injury the next day? Or would you keep this one to yourself? Did you choose the right answer? Remember, for any on-the-job injury, report it immediately to your on-the-job supervisor and your Randstad representative. Okay, what about this situation? If an accident almost happens but does not, should you still report it? Or would you only report it if someone was almost injured? It's important that you report anything that seems unsafe, even a near miss. We know we don't have time in this program to cover every safety issue you might encounter. What's important is that you become aware so that you can avoid hazards whenever possible. The client will provide specific safety rules and instructions for their facility that you will need to follow. As a Randstad employee, you need to remember these 3 things. No job is so important that it can't be done safely. You have a right to know about the materials you're working with. And above all, if you're ever in doubt, ask. We'll do whatever we can to make your time at Randstad as pleasant, rewarding, and safe as possible. It's up to you to help us out by making the right choices and working safely.